So over the last 24 hours, I've been consuming just so much information and content around the sanctions bill that was introduced by Representative Ronny Jackson in America, passing through committee and now awaiting congressional approval as well as Senate approval, and trying to figure out what it is. Because a lot of people have been asking me, even in my own video covering this, what does this mean for ordinary South Africans? So first, let's just quickly talk about how far along in the process we are now. One of the major hurdles, and this is from every single person I've listened to and every single article I've read, is actually getting it through committee. Most bills in America don't even make it through the committee phase. This one passed with flying colors, with almost all of the Republicans supporting it, and even a lot of Democrats supporting it. Now it needs to go onto the congressional floor. That would require a lot of sort of finagling and political games and getting people to support and back the bill. Once it's in Congress and it goes through and it is voted upon, and it will most likely pass. So according to everyone I've listened to, if it hits Congress, it'll pass because the Congress is held by the Republicans. The Republicans all want this bill. The Democrats, some of them want it, some of them don't. Then it will go into the Senate committee, where they will look at the bill and propose amendments, should amendments be made. And if no amendments are made, it goes to the Senate floor, where it will once again pass because, again, the Senate is controlled by the Republicans. If amendments need to be made, it will be made and then sent back to Congress so that they can deliberate and vote again, and then so on and so forth. So we are actually very far away from the sanctions actually being imposed. Not only that, but should the bill pass, the bill only gives the president a mandate to actually evaluate what the relationship with South Africa is and what South Africa is doing. So that there is the sort of broad strokes. Now, just to give you an idea of where the Americans are at, this is Ronny Jackson and his tweet from yesterday, or from 2 days ago, where he said South Africa made its choice when they abandoned America and our allies and sided with communists and terrorists. I listened to a lot of people who have insider knowledge, people who have spoken to staffers that work in the African foreign relations desk in Washington, D.C., as well as people who just know a lot about this stuff and follow this stuff closely. America has had a big problem with South Africa for a while. The South African government has continuously, for at least the last decade, if not longer, played a bit of a game with the Americans where they would gladly accept aid from the Americans, but then continuously turn around and tell the Americans, you don't get to tell us what to do. In a time where America and their sort of global dominance is being challenged by the Chinese, the South Africans decided, in our infinite wisdom, to side with the Chinese, to join the BRICS group. Now, if BRICS only came about as a bunch of countries wanting to work together, that would have been one thing. BRICS, however, and South Africa as part of this, made it very clear that they want to replace the dollar as the global reserve currency. This is a big problem for the Americans, but then also just this massive support for terrorist organizations around the world, like Hamas, for example, as well as Iran. These are nations that you genuinely don't want to be associated with, or organizations you don't want to be associated with. And then, of course, South Africa's sort of workings with the Kremlin and Russia after the invasion of Ukraine. I have said continuously on this channel, regardless of who you think started what or who is to blame for what, South Africa doesn't benefit from picking sides. America is our second largest trading partner. If we go with China, we lose our second largest trading partner. If we go with the West, we lose our main trading partner. For South Africa, the best place has always been to just be neutral, something that India actually does, and they're also part of the BRICS coalition. But India remains completely neutral in all things. They're saying, hey, we don't care. We're not saying anything. We'll trade with you. We're happy with everyone. That's where South Africa should have been. And in words, South Africa has continuously said, we're neutral. We don't want to get involved. But in action, South Africa has continuously tried to further moves and sort of political coalitions throughout the world that try and go directly against America and what America considers to be their national interests. What are sanctions, and what exactly does these sanctions mean for ordinary South Africans? So in terms of the sanctions, There are, broadly speaking, two types of sanctions. There are the national sanctions. These would be sanctions as imposed on North Korea or Russia, which means your country is completely cut off. It cannot operate within the world. It cannot trade with anyone. That sort of, and normally this would mean when the whole world sanctions you. In this case, it's just America. So it would basically mean South Africa cannot trade with America and America refuses to trade with South Africa. It would also mean that America immediately closes all businesses that are American in South Africa. So American companies would have to retreat from South Africa, which would be devastating to our economy. And then there are what is called targeted sanctions. And this is exactly what this American bill is. It's not the national one. America isn't interested in sanctioning South Africa as a country. They want to target the specific leaders in South Africa. In other words, this would be people like Ramaphosa, like Naledi Pandor, higher ups in the ANC, Julius, Malema. Basically, what this would mean is freezing their foreign funds, freezing visas to America. In other words, it would be illegal for them to travel to America or American territories or any allies that seek to gain favor with America and sort of start to impose the exact same sanctions. Because oftentimes that's exactly what happens in these things. America will impose these sanctions, and then America will sort of reach out to their partners around the world and say, hey guys, would you guys mind also backing us on these sanctions? Because, we want to get the ANC to stop doing crazy stuff and stop siding with Russia and all the rest of it. And in this, I actually think the Americans have a chance to convince even the European Union to make such a deal with America. Because remember, the European Union is currently the one dealing with the Russian situation. So if the European Union thinks that they can actually, through sanctions, get the South African government to back off from supporting Russia, back off from supporting China, they may actually go for it. But even if they don't, this would put significant strain on the leaders of South Africa. More importantly, a lot of the leaders of South Africa, guaranteed, people like Ramaphosa, have bank accounts in countries not South Africa. A rainy day fund, if you will. Now, while those banks may not be American banks, almost all banks throughout the world do a lot of business in America and are in some ways pegged to America. This was known in 2008 when the American housing crisis basically almost bankrupted multiple countries throughout the world, and actually a lot of banks throughout the world nearly went bankrupt because of their reliance on the Americans. What could happen is America could reach out to these banks where these funds may be held, and they would know, the CIA would know where all of these funds are, and basically tell these banks, freeze those assets or lose your business with America. Those banks will freeze those assets unless the home country interferes, which again, this would signal a lot of problems for those countries. And you need to ask yourself the question, will a country actually take that opportunity or the chance of angering America on behalf of a relationship that may or may not exist with South Africa? In this case, I highly doubt that they would. The whole point of these sanctions isn't to punish the South African people. And in essence, unless the ANC wants to be really petty and just sort of blanket sanction America, right, as a result of this, the South African people would not even feel these sanctions. These sanctions would be felt by South African politicians who are corrupt, South African leaders who are bad, but the South African people should get scot-free. Now, the ANC could change that, and they could say, well, because you did this, all American companies get out. Bad news, right? Really, really bad news. Or no more trade from America. Well, that means no more computer parts, no more TV screens for the most part. It would be bad, right? So fundamentally, no access to Google, because those things would be shut down as well. And unlike in Russia, we don't have a Google alternative here in South Africa. And almost all of the search engines that we use are American based. We are in a sort of weird situation where the ANC has always liked to make their problems our problems. And so that's the thing I fear most. But for those of you that might be afraid that, oh, wait, we could be punished here, I wouldn't be too worried, because the bill here specifically is not targeted at any South African businesses, any South African businessmen. It is targeted purely at South African leaders, and in the case of Russia, this will probably happen as well, entrepreneurs. So what they did in Russia is when Russia invaded Ukraine, not only did they blanket sanction Russia, but they also went after the oligarchs. And those oligarchs had all of their funds frozen. They basically could no longer move. All of their assets were seized. And we could see a similar thing play out here. This is where the US State Department is going to be of integral importance, because they will now, if this bill goes any further, they will absolutely be talking to countries around the world to try and get these countries to get on board and help out. That's the story as it stands right now. I'll keep you guys up to date if and when we know more. There's been some people who say, but the Democrats are against this bill because there's one Democratic congressman who sort of said, no, we don't want this at all. Guys, the Democrats do not control the Congress, nor do they control the Senate. And there were Democrats who actually voted in favor of this bill. This is a bipartisan bill. It is going through. No matter what you do, don't even focus on America stopping this. The only way this dies is if the Americans sort of move on, they forget and they don't care, or if South Africa starts changing their minds and actually stops supporting the enemies of America. That's the story. Let me know in the comment section down below. What do you think of this? Maybe you know something that I didn't include in this. I'd love to read your thoughts in the comment section. It always helps, by the way, guys, when you engage with the videos. YouTube loves engagement now, but if you watched until now, you are a trooper, and I absolutely adore you for that. Thank you. To all of the patrons and the YouTube members, thank you so much for your support. To help support this channel, click the join button just below this video, or link in the description down below where you can watch all videos ad-free. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, I'll see you in the next one. Peace.